Tech Cocktail Sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
Hi guys, I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm going to talk about probably three things. My thought going in is that I would tell a little bit about the Curb journey, which I think generally people like to hear a little bit about company formation, and tying into a little bit about what Frank gave as an introduction. I'm going to talk about strategy. I think strategy is something that oftentimes in startup and early stage companies it doesn't really get focused on all that much because you're just so excited to get the product out the door or get started. And so I want to talk about taking a step back and how you might actually execute a little bit on strategy. And the third area I'm going to talk about is kind of your one's individual role in a startup and early stage company. Before I get started though, can you guys give me a sense of how many of you are at something you've created yourselves, that you have started yourselves? Great. Yeah, okay. How about people who are working at a startup or early stage company today? Okay, good. Okay, good. Just give me a little sense of where we are, and I look forward to talking to you more and taking a bunch of questions. So. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about Curb Media. What is it? Curb is a digital media company. We focus in 3 lifestyle verticals. We publish websites on under the Curb vertical, which focuses on design and real estate. Eater is our dining and restaurant sites, and Racked is our shopping and style sites. We used to call ourselves a blog back in 2004 when we first got started, but really the company has evolved, speaking of journey, from a collection of blogs to a holistic media company today. One of the things that I'll talk about is that, sort of similar to Tech Cocktail and Frank and Jen, they got started in 2006. We started in 2004 as what we like to call an aggressive hobby. My co-founder and I, Lockhart Steele, his background is all in editorial. He was writing a blog about the Lower East Side at the time and anything else that happened to be on his mind, and was ended up running the editorial operations and essentially managing editor for all of Gawker Media. Back in 2004, we spent a lot of time explaining to people what a blog was. Obviously, that's not what we need to do today. But it talks a lot about kind of what has changed in the pop culture that happened at the same time as we were growing up as a company. We were fortunate in 2004 that we were able to get this started on our own, and we really grew it very organically, and we kept our day jobs. And I think that's something where now it's just a little bit of a different environment, and a lot of people are quitting their day jobs and getting funding and just getting going. And that puts different pressures, I think, on the business. I think there really wasn't as strong an entrepreneurial culture back in 2004, and I think if I quit my job in finance to do this startup, I think people would have thought it was that wasn't maybe necessarily the best thing to do. In reality, what it gave us was this opportunity to grow very slowly and organically, and as a result, we have a very authentic and organic and engaged audience base, which today is one of our competitive advantages. But going in, I can't say that's exactly how we started to think about the business. It's just the result of what we had done along the way. So, big picture with Curbs, we have, speaking of competitive advantages, one of the things that differentiates our sites is that we have local versions of most of our sites, and we have national versions of those 3 titles as well. So when we started in 2004, we just started with Curb New York. Today, we are in almost the top 25 DMAs across the country, and national versions of each. Our audience reaches about 4 to 5 million unique visitors a month, about 35 million page views a month. And we have a Curb DC, we have an Eater DC. We actually have about 4 or 5 folks here in DC working on the editorial side. Company-wise, we have about 50 employees full-time and about another 150 freelancers across the company. But when we started, speaking about the journey, we just started with New York and Curb, and then we expanded and we did Eater, our restaurant and dining site, and then we added Rack in 2007. And I think one of the things that really differentiates our sites is that we try to write with we have a very particular voice. When we first started, it was a little bit of a very snarky voice. In New York, it's less snarky today, but we were really sort of disrupting the culture of how do people talk about real estate in neighborhoods? And at the time, there really wasn't much else other than sort of national news about real estate, which sometimes can get fairly dull. But people love their neighborhoods, right? And they want to know what's going on in the city and where they live. And there wasn't anyone necessarily reporting on that in quite the voice that we had, that we were creating at the time. Now people are reading that a lot broader fashion. So as a result, we have this very authentic, engaged audience. Our audience demographic, they are, like everyone in this room, young, urban, affluent, educated tastemakers, right? And those folks also happen to be very attractive as a demographic to advertising. And our business model is, and always has been, advertising. 90+% of our revenue comes from advertising. And one of the things that we do in advertising, again, which differentiates ourselves, is that while we have web banners, we tend to focus a lot more on these sort of more custom curated ad campaigns. Today, it's the buzzword is native advertising. We've sort of been doing this same thing since 2005, 2006 or so. But really, what it is we have a great respect for our reader, and we have a lot of editorial DNA in our company. And so when we create advertising for the brands that we work with, we think about creating very high quality content for those brands. And that's how we approach a campaign. And so the campaigns that we do, while they do have web banner components, they also have things like sponsored posts, or they have videos, or we have event components as well. And we think that that really speaks to the strengths of our company and how we end up being able to reach the advertisers that we have in our company. For our company are big national brand advertisers, right? Like this, Starbucks and Dyson and Patron and big liquor advertisers as well. And while our audience reach is modest, we're able to attract that caliber of national brand advertising because of the engaged audience plus the highly creative campaigns that we provide for them. So that's sort of big picture about our audience and our growth. Today, like I said, we're about 50 employees. I think in the future, what we're really looking to do, we've built up these nice brands, is really to continue to grow in our national presence and expand our coverage and go deeper into our national sites. We've been doing video over the last few years. We'll do some more video in the same fashion in which we've done our tech editorial, our core editorial. And I just want to give a little premise around sort of the management of the company and how the company's structured there, because I think that helps as I sort of segue into strategy. So there's 4 of us that run the company today. Lockhart Steele is the CEO and founder of the company. I focus on strategic development as per my title. And Josh Albertson is our president. He oversees our whole advertising and essentially our COO of the company as well. And then we have a head of technology, Elliot Shepard, who's been with us since the beginning. I think a couple core things about how we decided to structure this company, because we essentially are 4 founders. We could have had like 25% equal shares in the company and been like a 4-headed monster. And we didn't. And from day one, I really love that we have a, Lockhart is essentially the leader of the company, and I think it's really important to establish some of that as you think about setting forth in the early stages of company formation. And then we all have the areas in which we work on, and those have changed a little bit through the years. But it helps to have a very consensus-driven organization, but yet there is still a true leader in the organization. I think that's really helpful. One of the things that I think is hard to do when you're starting out is figure out is strategy, right? You tend to you figure out like maybe why you started the company in the first place, what the initial goals are in your product or your service, but then you just get working. And everyone, gets working and kind of works in their own areas. Maybe they overlap a little bit, but I think it's rare sometimes to take a step back and think about really what's the overall strategy, which in my mind is how you think you've maybe established your goal, but how you think about how are you going to get to that goal. And it's not something we do very often. I think and so. One of the things in my background is that I've worked with a lot larger companies and where they tend to do more of these types of things. And so I think it's something that I kind of brought to the company to try to impose a little bit of this type of discipline. It's not always welcomed, right? Like a lot of times people work in startups or early stage companies, but they don't want the bureaucracy and they don't want that type of, they just want to get going, right? You just want to work. So every now and again I try to like push forth a little bit of an agenda around, let's take a step back and think about strategy and how we want to get where we're going as opposed to just executing. So a couple things we've done along the way that I think have actually been really useful is we took a break last summer and did sort of a strategic retreat for management, which really just meant getting out of the office into a location that would allow us to be relaxed and creative, wherever that means for you all, you know. And each one of the management team members, I said in a agenda for the meeting, each one of the management team members had to come up with something that they were going to present on, and we assigned topics out, right? So going into it, it wasn't kind of this nebulous, let's talk about strategy. It was we're going to talk about, you know, we essentially set it up like a SWOT analysis plus some other areas of expertise where people were speaking. And I think some of the things that came out of that were it also just improved communication across the company. Because sometimes, again, you're just like working so hard in your area that that type of communication doesn't necessarily happen at the senior level or whatever level you're working at, and that was really helpful, I think, for us. And it's just something I would encourage you to do, whether it's annually or quarterly, but just take a step back and think about what the goals are that you want to get to and figure out how exactly you're going to get there. I think, for me, a key element of strategy has always been articulating what the goals are and then realizing and also articulating what this means you're not going to do. What are your trade-offs? Because that helps you do your job so much more efficiently. So again, my role is, you know, strategic development. It's business partnerships and development. And Frank's mentioned partnerships a couple times. I'm not actually a big fan of biz dev, even though that's sort of my role. I think there's a lot of nebulous, wishy-washy, hey, let's partner. But there's nothing really that comes out of it. And I think a lot of times we get approached, it's very easy to be reactive. And I think if you've sort of defined a strategy in advance and set the goals that you want to hit this quarter, whatever the time frame is, you can also say, like, we don't do that, or this is how we do something. And that is, for me, it's really, really helpful. And an example I'll give is around content syndication. So a lot of people want to syndicate content with us. Either they want to put content on our site or they want our content on their site. So we don't put other people's content on our site. That makes it really easy for me to say we don't do this when people approach us to do that. And then on the content syndication side, when we syndicate content out to someone else, we have very strict rules about how it's presented and what the attribution is, and there's some tech issues that we have to make sure we maintain SEO, and then we need some remuneration for that, some guidelines for that. But because I can create this, hey, here are the 5 points that we need, it's great because then when I talk to folks who want to do it and they don't want to give me one of those 5 points, I just say, well, we don't do it. Like this is how it works. And that helps, I just give that as like a specific example, but I think the trade-offs are really defining what you do and what you don't do can be so, it creates a lot of relief when you look at your inbox about all these people trying to approach you to do things, and you can say, look, we don't do it, and then I can move on and tackle the things that are more strategic and helpful. And I guess the last thing I'll talk about a little bit is your role in your own companies, whether it's your startup you're doing yourself or whether it's in an early stage company. And that is one of the great benefits, I think, of working in these more loosely organized organizations or companies is that you get to wear a lot of hats. That's great, and that can be really satisfying and fulfilling. But on the flip side, oftentimes there really isn't hierarchy and there often isn't mentorship. And everyone wants to have a cool culture, but you may or may not actually define that culture or know exactly what your role is in that culture. And so one of the things I sort of encourage everyone to do, and I do it and try to think about it for myself, is beyond your title, what is your role in the organization? What do you want it to be? So my title is, VP Strategic Development. But what's really interesting to me in the organization is we don't have anyone that does HR. The thing that I love the most about having helped create a company is creating jobs, and hopefully creating jobs for people where they feel fulfilled doing their jobs, right? So one of the things I love about our company is that we hire a lot of really young people. We train them and we give them what I think is a tremendous amount of autonomy in their ability to, if you're a journalist, if your ability to write and really own a website or a web property. But for me, that's not enough. Like, I want to then be able to figure out how to help those people advance within the company and give them leadership roles within the company. And so, because I don't focus on editorial, and I'm just using editorial as an example, it allows me to think about, like, hey, let's think about how should we do review processes, right? Or what other ways in which can I help mentor people in an organization in which don't actually report to me? And I've just decided, like, that is one of the things that's important to me, and it's a role I try to think about. I also really try to think about, like, what can I do to support the management team to be better at their jobs? Because I don't do editorial, and I don't do tech, and I don't do ad sales. So it's not in my title, but it's just something I think about as a role. And so I just encourage everyone to, what are sort of what's really the role under the surface that you play in the organization, and how can you make your own team better and make it to a better place that you want to work and other people want to work? Because that's one of the really cool things about creating your own company.